Ian and I are going to show you how to construct a Rubens tube. Here's what you're going to need. Alright, so here are all the parts laid out that you're going to need. First, we have the most obvious part, which is the tube. In this case, we used a steel tube, an 1/8 inch thick. And you're going to want some sort of end connector. This is just a spare because it's never going to come off again. Something like this is rubber. For our purposes, we drilled a 1/4 of an inch hole in the end, which then connects to the next thing we're going to need, which is some way to connect to the propane, because you need to source propane. We have one of these little connectors, which fits in our 1/4 inch tube right here, and then sticks in there, which we'll do more later. And then you'll connect this other end to the source of the propane, which in our case is our school's chemistry lab propane source. Next, you're going to want some sort of stand, because as you can see, this really isn't that stable, so you're going to want something to put over there. We use 2x4s and cut notches in them. You can use whatever's lying around your house, that'll be fine. Then we have a balloon and some rubber bands, which when the time comes, we're just going to stretch over the end of this pipe, kind of like the head of a drum. That way, it'll let the sound in, but it won't let the propane out. This hard rubber cap, really won't let much sound in, and if we just attach the speaker directly, it's going to let the propane out. Neither of those we want. So that brings us to our last piece of equipment, which is this nice speaker here that I almost dropped. And we took this out of its protective casing so that we can really get it up as close as we want, so that we can get really good sound in there. And then we have this hooked up to our sound system here, which we can play music from out of the iPod, or we have our nice little tone generator, which I can play and make it really loud and obnoxious like that. That's what you're going to need, and now we're going to go a little more in depth about how to make it. Alright, so I'm going to go a little bit more in depth about our pipe, because this is the part of the experiment that has the most variation, and when I was researching online, this is the part that I had the most trouble with trying to figure out what we needed, because it seemed that every set of instructions was a little different. So when you're making yours, again, you have a little bit of choice. You can do what you want, but I'll tell you what we did and maybe point you in the right direction for some other alternatives. We used 1/8 inch thick steel pipe. This is probably one of the better pipes that you can use because it's a lot more heavy duty, and it can stand up to propane flames for longer. However, it's not the most user-friendly material. First of all, you have to be able to get your hands on it, which is going to be a little more expensive. And in addition, you're going to need some heavy-duty tools to drill all the holes, because again, 1/8 inch steel. We used a drill press in our school's machine shop. If you don't have access to a drill press, I would really not recommend using this. Instead, I'd recommend using an alternative like duct piping, which is a very thin galvanized steel. Some things to take into consideration when you're using that. First of all, there's a seam on duct pipe, so you're going to want to make sure that your seam is airtight so that it doesn't leak the propane. And secondly, if you use a thin steel, it's going to heat up a lot quicker than this really thick steel. So you're going to want to take that into consideration. You want to make sure that your duct pipe doesn't start melting if you leave it running too long. And you want to make sure that when you have your balloon or whatever you're using for an end piece, you want to make sure that the heat doesn't travel down the end of the pipe and melt it. Now, even with this, we're still going to have to be careful how long we run it, because eventually this will heat up. It's metal, it conducts heat. But as long as we're smart about it and don't run it too long, it'll be fine. But this really thick pipe does give us a little more breathing room there. And the last thing is, if you want to check out our holes here, we used 1/8 inch holes every 1/2 inch, and we left about 5 inches on either end so that the heat would not travel as quickly to the end and, like I said, melt your end caps. But as long as you're smart about it and don't run it for too long, you should be fine with whatever setup works best for you. Alright, so this is just an update because by this point we've already done the Rubens tube, and we discovered that despite the fact that I just said that you should probably put your holes about a 1/2 inch apart, when you do them that close, the flames start to merge together, and there's too much room for the propane to escape, so it escapes too quickly and the pressure doesn't get high enough. So in retrospect, I would recommend putting your holes every 1 inch apart. and it'll work a lot better. We ended up covering the entire thing with aluminum foil and only opening every other hole. But when you're doing yours, I would just recommend drilling your holes every inch. Alright, the first part of the assembly that we're going to talk about is the end of the pipe that you're not playing the music through. You obviously need to make it airtight so that you're not letting propane out. Our pipe is not threaded like some is, so we weren't actually able to use a steel end cap because most steel end caps are made for threaded steel pipe. So if you do have steel pipe that was bought in a store, sometimes you can use a steel end cap. We ended up using a rubber one, which for our purposes actually worked out really well because this is the connector that we're using to load the propane into the tank, and it is a fourth of an inch thick, which is the same width as the hose that we're going to connect it to the propane with. So also in the end of this, I'm not sure if you can see it in the video, but in the end of this we drilled a 1/4 of an inch hole, which we can, with a little bit of effort, stick that into. So now, not only have I made the end airtight, it also doubles as the entry for the propane, which is really convenient. The one thing you want to worry about with rubber, I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier, is that this will melt eventually. It's pretty hard rubber, so it'll probably last a while, but if you're going to be running propane flames through here, just make sure that the pipe isn't heating up too much down here and it will melt this. Alright, so the next step of our assembly is going to focus on the end of the pipe that we are going to be playing the music through. Now, we have to take a couple things into consideration for the material that we're going to use for the end cap. This hard rubber end cap worked really well for the other end because all we had to do was keep the propane in. But this time, not only do we have to keep the propane in, but we also have to let sound in, and this doesn't work so well for that. So the material that we're going to use are balloons, or any other latex, stretchy plastic kind of material you want. So as you're going to see, Ian is going to take our balloon, and he's going to stick it over the end of the pipe, and try to keep it really tight, and he's going to have a rubber band to help him. Now this is going to form a thin and tight seal, which is really going to let a lot of sound through the tube, which is important obviously because this experiment its main focus is sound. So now this tight end cap, show the camera, is going to act like almost like the head of a drum. It's going to vibrate, it's going to be thin, it's going to let a lot of sound through, and it's going to keep the propane inside the tube, which is obviously extremely important. Alright, so our next step is going to involve attaching the speaker to the end of the tube. Now, like I said before, you really want to take the actual speaker out of its housing so that you can put it up and get a really nice tight fit. That way you can get a really crisp, clear sound going into the tube, and you can get 100% of your sound, or as close to as possible, 100% of your sound going into the tube and not just spraying around the room, because then you're going to lose a lot of it. You can attach it to the end of the tube really whatever way you want. You can be fancy if you want. We are going really low-tech here. We have a couple of books supporting our speaker, and then we're just going to use some duct tape. And as you can now see, we have duct taped it onto there. Not the most elegant solution, but it's really simple, really easy to do, and it's pretty easy to take on and off if we need to replace things, especially the balloon. Like I said, it might melt, so it's pretty easy on, easy off. So I wouldn't recommend getting any more fancy than that, because you really don't need to. Alright, and for our last step, we're just going to take our propane hose and stick it in this end, do the hole that I made in our rubber cap, and then we're going to take the other end and stick it into our gas source, which in this case is our ChemLab's gas supply, or you can use propane tank if you have a regulator properly hooked up.
Try the sound, try the wave generator. Right before the drop.
That is cool.
Just keep the drop, pause it.
Maybe we should put the flames a little lower.
Oh, you see it?
Yeah, I see it.
You see it?
Yeah. There you go.
There it is.
Yeah!
Yeah!
Woo!
You guys see the sine wave?
Nice.
Woo! Higher, higher.
Yeah!
There.
so cool.
That is so cool. Oh! Whoa. That's awesome.
That's even better.
We got 1, 2, 3. 3 peaks. Alright, put something with a melody on.
Yeah.
Space. Turn the volume down. Yeah. I was turning the flames up.
Yeah, put it in
Alright, now I'm trying to see some drums. Can you watch them for Have a song in mind?
unnecessary. Yeah, put some
Rapping in Alabama?
Yeah, we did have another one. So that works a little better.
Yeah, you should have saw the sine wave we made.
Ow, he's a Ow. She's my tag, just letting it all hang out. Ow, she's a bread. Ow. I like a baby stack, that's the back. Ain't holding nothing back. Ow, she's a bread. Ow. Well, put together, everybody knows this is how the story goes. She knows